right, well, we still have a few stragglers, but I think we should begin. I want to start by welcoming you all to the City Building Design Lab, to the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and to the University of Calgary. For those of you that don't know me, my name is John Brown. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape, and it is my pleasure to be here this evening to kick off this Design Matters lecture event, which is being held in conjunction with our block week. So for the undergrad students that may not know about block week, and for the guests that we have, each term we shut down the graduate programs in our school, and we run a 1-week intensive series of courses. So I think there's something like 17 courses being offered by guests in a variety of different areas of specialization this week, and we'll be doing it again in the spring. And it is an opportunity for our students to get a diversity of views, to either explore projects in great breadth, maybe going into a different discipline. I understand that Philip has students in architecture, planning, and landscape architecture in his group, but also opportunities to go into great depth and do something in a very specific way in an area of your interest. So it's a very important part of our program and something that makes I think our graduate school quite distinctive. I do want to start by acknowledging that we are located on the traditional lands of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. I also want to acknowledge that the City of Calgary is home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 5 and 6. To get things started, I'm going to invite Professor Enrica Delara to the podium. Enrica is the Associate Dean of the Planning and Landscape Architecture Program, and she will introduce our guest.
Welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest today. John already contextualized this event within the block week. Philippe Speranza, in addition to share his work and concepts with us today, is also teaching a course to our professional programs students in the Master of Planning, the Master of Landscape Architecture, and the Master of Architecture on computational approaches and tools for urban design. And we are thrilled to learn from him. Philip is an architect, urban designer, and educator. He explores the idea of a fine-grained urbanism, that is the subject of today's lecture, using computational data acquisition and visualization methods to understand social and environmental qualities at the human scale. As associate professor at the University of Oregon, he is the director of the Barcelona Urban Design Program IG, leading a team of instructors for a full-term spring program, partnering with the Municipality of Barcelona's Municipal Institute of Urbanism, architects and urban ecologists from Catalonia and Galicia. Is a social interaction tool for Barcelona's Superillas, was developed in 2016 from meetings with Barcelona Agency of Urban Ecology Director Salvatore Rueda, and was first published in 2018 in the Journal of Urbanism. Philip is also a practitioner as a principal of Speranza Architecture and Urban Design. He aims to apply this research with both public agencies and private developers at the scale of cities, master planning, new middle housing, and single-family homes. So I wanted to, before leaving the floor to Philip, I wanted to introduce the subject of the lecture, quoting him. I think is appealing, compelling way to share emergent technologies and how we can use to shape our human environments in a meaningful way. As mobile computing and geospatial information becomes more accessible and cities are increasingly impacted by climate change, fine-grained urbanism offers data collection, analysis, and design methods that provide the most detailed spatial and temporal information ever about the constantly changing urban environment. And with this spirit of change, innovation, and hope for the future of our shared environments, I'm pleased to have Philip with us.
Thank you. Restart maybe, or try one more time. We'll restart.
Let's just go to the video display settings again.
Oh yeah, yeah. All right. Okay.
And do that swap.
So I'd like to thank Dean Brown, Enrica, and Tawab out there. Have been really welcoming to me in this time, and the students, you're still with me. We're just getting over the hump, so that's great. It's amazing that you do this in the 1 week and be able to invite other people here. For me, I'm actually learning immensely, especially from working with the planning students, landscape architecture students, and the architecture students. So it's been a privilege for me, and I want to thank the entire community for that. Urban life has long been one of pop-up businesses, chance encounters, and intrusive sounds, the gritty aspects of city life. Mobile technology has slowly given us information to connect to these rapid changes in our everyday lives, and then to us, we can literally change our minds about destinations as we walk out the door today. Food carts might move around and have irregular times, but today fans can readily follow them in real time. Cities' tactical street painting for play, areas of bike lanes can respond to quickly monitored user feedback. Urban dwellers are guided by mobile app directions, business reviews, and networked social and ecological data, including the momentary locations of protests, celebrations, and air pollution. As mobile computing and geospatial information becomes more accessible, and cities are increasingly impacted by climate change, this idea of fine-grained urbanism offers data collection, analysis, and design methods that provide the most detailed spatial and temporal information ever about the constantly changing urban environment around us. Fine-grained urbanism explores the gap between mobile phone data collection methods and emerging measurability of both social equity and climate resilience. It eschews big data for customizable information at fine-grained spatial and temporal scale. How long is air, in the case here, how long is air pollution measured at an elementary school? At what spatial scale? How? And when is it actionable? In the 1990s, we still routinely used Sanborn maps in New York to understand land use. This evolved to city-maintained GIS maps for tax and building records, but were often closed or slow to input by public officials and closed to input from outsiders. Private groups paid a fee to use their top-down two-dimensional maps, conceding to Young Gale's criticism of urban design from a helicopter's view of the city. People on foot were then used tablets to record interviews or visual observations of street-level human experience, seen by so many urban design students in William White's The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. The open nature of GIS data, such as OpenStreetMaps and Open Data Barcelona, overlaid with one's own newly recorded data, leads to data collection with more carefully social and climate problem-centric, attenuated to when, where, and what quality one wants it to. Thusly, the data can be recorded faster and at a scale of time and space that is unprecedented. Larger problems may be examined as an aggregate of granular aspects of the city and our everyday lives. A Plaza study for a U.S. downtown housing development, which you see here in the top, can reveal a granular deficiency such as places to sit, play, and eat. At the same time, the evolution of effective, low-cost environmental sensors for phenomena of major urban health problems such as air pollution, noise pollution, urban heat island effect has created entire ecosystems and networks of thousands of sensors, in this case, the sensor that's part of the Purple Air Network, where a decade ago, just one or a handful of these sensors existed in an entire city. Not only are there more sensors, but everyday users and designers now have that access to these at their fingertips. User behaviors and cities' tactical approaches enable rapid testing of changes that in the past would have relied on physical changes that were much slower. Together, the overlaying of these social and environmental qualities has unlocked previously unseen integrated relationships about inequities in urban environments. A housing cost study before and after the new transit stations in Southeast Portland, for example, in Oregon, can reveal fine-grained scales of gentrification with specific patterns of space, time, and across housing type, far greater than a census tract ever could. Or a study of air quality of a predominantly Latinx immigrant working class elementary school near a highway of a growing density highway leading toward let's say a small sneaker company, namely Nike, can be used to kind of monitor a greater urban density that's grown up around that school. Fine-grained urbanism describes methods of data-driven urban design from collection to visualization analysis and application. I'll start to explain the creation of new data sets to target emerging urban problems. This next section I'll go through data analysis, visualization, and data-driven design ultimately through some examples. Why is this important? The human-created problems of social inequity and global warming have been reaching alarming levels. The fact that these two climates are interconnected, however, means that location-specific solutions can potentially impact both. While fine-grained, data-driven urban design uses a small-scale lens to improve design and stewardship of urban spaces, it can be both the result and improve global knowledge. As technology and biology become more interwoven, we will increasingly be able to use tools that provide near real-time actionable information. So I have here a number of slides here about the introduction of kind of what I consider a history of some of the research I do. And so you may be familiar with these. You're seeing here some of the maps of Dr. Snow and Henry Whitehead, their tracking of cholera. So this has been cited by Sarah Williams at MIT in her book Data Action, as well as Stephen Johnson in Ghost Book. And as some of my students may know, this is actually, for better or for worse, a very similar workflow. And so for much time, they did not know the relationship, the spatial relationship of cholera. And what you're seeing here is a map and a kind of marking of the number of incidents. And it took this kind of visual mapping that you see on the left and the list in the middle, and I would actually argue, or what other people have argued, Henry Whitehead's social network, to connect the relationship of the people falling ill, and you see the image on the upper right, the pump station. The idea that the pump station was kind of reinfecting the water and the people. This kind of geospatial scale, kind of going back to that. The idea of fine-grained urbanism that I'm proposing, in a way, is not new at all. There have been plenty of urban design theorists who have proposed similar ideas of mapping in space and time. I would argue what's different is technology. So from Louis Kahn's traffic maps in Philadelphia, Donald Appleyard's livable streets, Ian McHarg, of course, who many people credit being the founder of GIS through certain ideas of ecological inventories. And then we think of Taking Measure Across the Land by James Corner as well. We know this, like raise your hand if you've seen the movie of this, The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces by William White. So this is using camera technology. So people have used the technology, really it's more of a kind of acceleration and accessibility. Through the mobile phone, we now have this ability to record and to kind of track this data to, kind of amazingly enough, our 3D modeling information today. Again, much of what I talk about is I would credit to Jan Gehl in terms of eye-level, street-level view of spaces and the movement away from vehicular-based design, human-scale design. I base a lot of the kind of theory on Jan Gehl. Hella Soholt, the new director of Gehl Design, I've had meetings with her and she's been incredibly informative. And then again, going back to, let's say, systems design. So I actually would encourage The Nature of Economies by Jane Jacobs. It's kind of very interesting, almost like systems thinking, as well as Chris Alexander, a professor of mine for graduate school was Manuel de Landa, and ideas about assembly theory around Gilles Deleuze. And then lastly here, some pioneers who are doing amazing work in this area. Philippe Rom on the left, and ideas of kind of thermodynamics in urban space and sensor-based connectivity about this. Carlo Ratti in the middle, especially through either the MIT Sensible Cities Lab or his own office in Torino. And on the right, Billy Faircloth. She's at Kieran Timberlake, or was at Kieran Timberlake, but some of their project, you're seeing a project there where they're putting sensors on a rooftop and then using it for how many of you do kind of post-occupancy analysis to see how effective is the green roof? So sensors today, and not just a sensor, but a field of sensors, allows her and their group to better understand the next project in this case. So I have 3 sets here of projects. I'd like to talk about some of these ideas through the projects. I'm an architect, I like to do that. But this first one is around data acquisition and the idea of like boots on the ground and what it means to do data collection and what it means for these projects. And this first one, as Enrica mentioned, is a really important one to me. So this was the social interaction tool. So I was working in Barcelona you can see here, from about 2010 to 2015 with their 22 at, so it's a new innovation district, with Arantxa Garcia Gonzalez on the left, and at the same time doing some kind of initial computing and urban design work. It wasn't really parametric. I just started at that time to use Grasshopper, and there was a graduate student, Dan Anthony, coming from Stanford, and he and I were using Galapagos together, which is an evolutionary design tool. This was in 2011, and back then it was like machine learning, which we would now call AI. It's basically computing. And so when their office closed in 2015, the 22 at office, she knew I was doing some computing work, Arantxa, and directed me to meet this person, Salvador Rueda. So before 2015, Rueda and his office of Barcelona Urban Ecology, and now a very close friend of mine, Cynthia Echave on the lower left, I met the two of them, and they explained their plan. So it's a little hard to see, but their idea was to create these super illas, these super islands or super blocks in the city, and around ideas of almost a village mentality, and I'll kind of explain that. And he has a kind of larger framework for measuring mobility, open space, land use, metabolism on the right, but he didn't really have a sense of how to measure social interaction and cohesion. So at the same time, a very dear friend and colleague or mentor of mine, Karen Frank, I had started research with her measuring how to write about September 11th memorials in New York. So she and I both lived through September 11th in New York. And so we visited a number of memorials in the outlying area of New York. And we're also writing a book chapter on ethnicity and food carts and food trucks. So these kinds of topics are kind of, let's say, soft science. She's a social scientist. And so I was in a position through her mentorship to kind of connect this idea of social science protocols and understandings with computation to help them try to measure social cohesion. The idea of these super illas is around problems in Barcelona. And so this is a recent picture on Diagonal in Barcelona. There's actually 2 lanes in addition on each side of this road. So you can imagine the challenges coming from this, namely sound pollution, air pollution, and vehicular congestion. So I have these maybe reversed. The image on the right is what the bus network looked like before the super illas. So the super illas are these super blocks, as you can imagine. Their kind of mobility, I mean, it really is a mobility plan for the city, but that mobility plan of here, what you're seeing, the new bus network and bike lanes, sets up more of a village mentality. It's mobility, but it's also about villages. So there's this kind of feeling in Catalonia and much of Spain where people have migrated to cities, but their families still have houses and kind of family houses that they go to in summer. So there's this, I would argue, this feeling, just like this image is showing. This is Gracia, which is a previously autonomous village in Barcelona, and it feels like a village. So much of their new urban design has this criteria or feeling of wanting to be in a village setting. The moped is likely not going to run into the baby carriage or the bicycle, right? These things can coexist in a kind of shared street. So again, this idea of a pueblo idea, and on the right, they use this idea to describe these superillas as placer, which kind of translates to pleasure and delight, but I really think it has to do with security and feeling of being in a place like a village. So this is some of the drawings of us looking at some study areas where we did data collection. Here are some slides. You may be familiar with the Plan Eixample from Cerdà of 1864, but actually the next slide, oh, you can see that, great, is these, you can see these previously autonomous villages around the center of the city. So actually, the walls of Barcelona did not come down until 1877, and the expansion of the city takes out much of what we know of the city today, but those villages, whether it's Sarrià or Gracia or Poblenou or Corts, is really some of the models for urbanism. And so the superillas became a part of that. And so one of my first tasks was to try to understand their logic of what does social cohesion and interaction. So I had to build this theoretical framework through their writing to understand. They're really just looking at social space, social housing, social services, demographics, and then infrastructure, and we adapted and added to these. So when they thought of an example of this is that when they tried to measure access to housing, and really they mean a diversity of housing in a neighborhood or a 3x3 block area, they would measure public housing. So someone coming from the United States in a market economy, we looked at housing accessibility. So for all of these things that they were looking at, we took a lens of kind of a public-private lens. And then also it's about kind of interactions or possibility of social interaction. We added jobs, like we are at our jobs a certain part of the day and we interact with people. And then lastly, having done this project applied to Eugene, Oregon, where I'm from, we added a category of infrastructure of transit, IT, and basic services. Access to toilets, access to water, access to shelter. So we're able to then create these visualizations, which again, I would credit back to Karen Frank, the social scientist mentor of mine. She taught me a lesson early on: do not collapse the data. Do not flatten dissimilar data, I would say. What you're seeing on the right is a map of more or less, plus or minus 200 data points, more or less to each address, and approximately 60 data indicators for each of those. So we can then feed that into a visualization, which effectively takes that framework I just showed you and visualizes it where we can see where things rate, and we will compare that to a baseline, namely the Gracia neighborhood we just showed you. And again, we're not flattening data. At no point are we combining dissimilar datas, and yet using visual language to allow you to see, okay, the uses group is high or low, but we can then look in a more granular way within it, what within the housing area is deficient or rating high or low. We can compare one superilla to another superilla, and in this case, in the next case, these are 3 baselines in the Gracia neighborhood. So that picture of the neighborhood I showed you of the previous village is what the city, not what we think, but what the city thinks is a good model to measure. And then we put these on top of each other to look for differences. The superillas, this is the first pilot study for the superilla in Poblenou, tactical urbanism, right? Putting out some tires and paint and programming and use and doing participatory work to make sure to understand, does this work, what doesn't work with the neighbors. And then that same intersection today is a playground. So let that sink in. They're putting playgrounds in intersections, right? I remember mentioning this on my campus planning committee, and they're like, what? I was like, no, we won't put a playground. We'll put like a classroom, like a bench of classroom, like in the middle of the intersection at school, like in the middle of the campus. They're like, what? But it really makes you, it has to work together across a disciplinary nature, the planners, the traffic engineers, the architects, the landscape architects, and it works. This is the same intersection. If you look closely, you can see some of the wood playground in the back, at around 3 o'clock when school lets out. There's a school just off camera here, and this is the patio. So I don't remember this in school, but when I did spend time in Spain and had a partner and she had children, we would go to pick up the children, and at 3 o'clock you bring the child, it's like tea time, like a little Nutella sandwich, and you don't go home. You stay, and you socialize with your neighbors. So that phenomena is supported by the architecture. This is, again, in the middle of the street. This is literally the street, and again, you're seeing a combination. You're actually seeing some hardened, the playground, and you're seeing these planting pits, or planting rather, containers, which I know the landscape architects are probably cringing at, because yes, the trees had a very hard time, but again, as a temporary solution to kind of test things, these work really well. So this is the state of the Superias now. A similar project at the same time, or similar time, was around air quality, and I had this great fortune to work with Xavier Carol on the left, who's an air quality specialist in the city of Barcelona, and Jordi Sunyer at Creal, basically a human health, especially a child human health expert around ideas of air quality, and this was kind of duplicated in Portland as well. And so we were also looking at the Superia area, which in Portland translates to 5x5 instead of 3x3, and working with a friend of mine, Marc Vidal, and this was back in 2015, these are really bad sensors, but we were able to do a number of different studies. We put our sensors next to much better sensors and discovered, as with the sensors today, they correlate really well until the relative humidity goes above 95%. So if we can record, and we always do this today, the PM, particulate matter, with temperature and humidity, we can then track whenever the relative humidity goes over, let's say 90%, just to be safe, and scrub that data. We then know our data is correlating, our $40 sensor is correlating quite well with a station that's about $200,000. It's not perfect, but it's enough to do pilot studies, and I'll explain later, we're doing a work project with the city now. And even in a very preliminary way, this study showed that what you would think is the Gran Via at the bottom, where there's 11 lanes of traffic, would be much higher. Like consistent modeling of more like NOx suggests that where there's more roads and traffic, there's going to be more pollution. That's not what this showed. The data showed that that was not the consistent finding, and in fact, our work and work of others led to ideas that, for example, the London plane trees, which do a fantastic job of keeping the light out, also do a great job of keeping the air pollution in. So the city banned the use of London plane trees, platanos trees, in the city. Like a landscape, you can see there, it's like a landscape architecture outcome of the project. So a kind of third project here around air quality and this idea of data acquisition and the importance of it and the scale of it was done more recently in Tigard, which is this small perimeter city to Portland. And I had actually tried to work with them to get racial demographic data around the gentrification project in Portland. And they were like, we don't have a lot of that, but we'd love if you could help us with air pollution. So again, leaning on some of the findings at that time, now this was in 2022, Jordi has already published much more work on the impact of air quality on children's respiratory and neurological development before 7 years old. It's extremely sensitive before 7 years old. So the road, the dark white line is Route 5 that goes up and down the west coast. And the school we examined, we wanted to place our sensors was around Metzger Elementary School. So we created drawings like this. Drawings like this are not really sensor-based, but just OSM OpenStreetMap data, where we're showing the potential or high-level potential source of pollution, namely the magenta roads. The little marks on the right are all residential locations of the children. So we're trying to get a general sense of, let's say, the source of the pollution and the sensitivity to pollution before we do our study. And then this road, this kind of state route, leads up this way, and that state route has gotten a little busier. You can see it's just within a quarter mile of the school, and it leads to, again, that small sneaker company that we call Nike, their world headquarters. So in examining or kind of coming to this place, you say, how is it that a small school is now being impacted by so much air pollution? Well, it's possible that the school didn't change, the urbanism changed around it. And that's another reflection on scales of time in urban design. So we build our own kits. We mostly build our own kits, painfully, because we want to make sure we're, again, getting the PM, temperature, humidity. We're dealing with a pretty significant challenge today of power and Wi-Fi. So we have a cell phone battery in it that only lasts 2 or 3 days. and a SD chip. So we're basically mounting and dismounting for, in this case, about a month. Placing our sensors, collecting our data for about a month for approximately 10 sensors. Even if we lose one or two, we've just gotten used to that, a certain redundancy. But at least a certain work like this, where the city, I don't know if I'd say, we all start with assumptions in our projects, right? Or what is the assumed cause of something. So what you're seeing here is the drop-off area. This is the drop-off area for the buses. This is a unofficial drop-off area, and it definitely rains in Oregon. So you have a lot of waiting parents in SUVs there, right? And this idea is like, well, we want to encourage students to bike to school, and so we'd love to have data that showed that that drop-off area is really a light bulb of air pollution, and we want kind of parents to make that behavioral decision on their own. Well, I would say from a month of data, that's not what we found. So the kind of line on the left is actually the highway that's within a quarter mile away. And in all of the data we collected, yes, there were some modest spikes of data from potentially the waiting vehicles, but for the most part, you're seeing much larger waves of data around a kind of adjusted traffic time, like rush hour. A little later, and that was later, we found out that was, or realized there's a mall nearby, so there's like a 9 o'clock rush hour home. It's kind of interesting, the city didn't really want to publish that. Their message was, you need to use cars less, and that's good for the air quality. So it's kind of interesting always to see like the message they want, and then what the data shows, and then what they want to project afterward, I would say. But this is not, that kind of study was a month. It's not normalized over a year, but it's enough to start to get, especially when you see all the graphs like aligning over each other, 10 sensors, like something here is consistent, if not accurate. So actually this is kind of a follow-up project. So today I'm doing a project, similar work, but with the, thankfully, Arantxa and Aurora have connected me with the air pollution team in the city and their own sensors, because we're doing this project, we're studying the same area with the students here for a new high-density housing area in the city from a post-industrial neighborhood. And there's significant issues, so I'll leave it at this. You could just see a little water. So we're near the port, the belt road for the city, a major industrial connection, and another significant road here. And so this seems interesting to measure where there would be differences of air pollution in terms of the city now placing housing. The city this new district will represent 28,000 new residents, 52% protected housing, affordable housing. 52% protected housing. This is obviously a project of Ada Colau, the mayor from the last few years, who's a big housing advocate. Amazing project, but maybe there's things we can do to locate the schools, playgrounds, and housing areas with some sensitivity to air pollution. So these are our locations, and in fact, there's already a high school right next to the highway. Whoops. I really think this is a real problem that we don't face in Portland. We closed a school that came up for deferred maintenance, but it was near the highway, and we started to have, it wasn't my study, other air pollution studies, and they made an important critical decision. We are not going to fix this building. We are going to leave it and get a new location. Again, kind of the sensor production. This is me tired putting my ladder up and down every 2-3 days. This is the sensor near the highway. You can imagine, like, this is going to be higher, but we're actually very close to the school nearby, the high school nearby. This is what some of the data looks like. We're comparing different sensors in the same period of approximately 2 days. We're trying to also map on the top jornada laboral, which is like the workday, by the way, we're in a construction zone, so there's a lot of new building going on, so likely that's contributing to, during the workday, these significant air quality spikes, especially because those are the sensors near the construction sites. So at first you say, okay, that seems obvious. One way that helps, which might not seem that major, is the city wants to bring better sensors now, like more higher resolution sensors to the place in their mobile kits. They know they're not going to set them up on those days. That saves resources and allows us to do more data collection. We know those days the pollution is likely coming from the construction sites, which, by the way, the construction sites are going to be going on for at least a decade. If I have a child tomorrow, that seems to be within 7 years. what can we do about that? This kind of data makes that more evident. Second part I want to talk about here is on data visualization. So a lot of that was talking about the resolution of data acquisition, especially at a really small scale, around either walking and doing these kind of social science protocols or around air quality sensors. So this will be a little more about visualization. So we had this great opportunity to do a project which was a master plan for the Ken Kesey farm. So raise your hand if you know who Ken Kesey is. I'll explain a little bit. I bet you some of you do know who Ken Kesey is. So this is Ken Kesey, William Burrow on the upper right, and Jack Kerouac. So Burrow and Kerouac were part of what was called the beatniks. They're the first people who used alcohol in art in the, let's say, 20th century and let their artwork be kind of driven through their writing in this case. Jackson Pollock through painting, a kind of changed state of mind. So Kesey was a writer. He was at graduate school at Stanford, and he, let's say, enlisted in some experiments, and they were testing LSD on him, the military was, to create super soldiers like the Germans did. And so Kesey then translated that experience into writing when you may have seen, have any of you seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the movie, or read the book? So it's a book about, he wrote it while on LSD, and it's a book about mental health. And one could contribute this and many other, let's say, writing at the time to the radical change of mental health around the world. So have any of you seen a tie-dye shirt? Or like that was invented at the farm. The Grateful Dead played at the farm multiple times a year. Like this was a place of kind of hippie culture. So what I'm getting at is this place has this kind of weird social cultural quality. How do we measure with sensors that? Like that's a strange thing, but we tried. And actually what I presented in EDRA conference a few months ago was it's more about when we have these artistic retreats and we think we want to escape, let's say, consciousness, whether that's through drugs or alcohol or through just going into nature to find another consciousness. What is that? What are the environmental kind of qualities that lead to that? So in this case, we're using Ladybug. We have our sensor kit out. I remember I was traveling and some of the people working with me went out to go recharge the sensors and they're like, we lost number 10. I'm like, where's number 10? They're like, a cow kind of jammed it into the pond. So we had 9 sensor datas that day. Nothing like collecting data on a farm. So it led to like these ideas of emergent kind of patterns and ideas, whether it's things we saw or things we kind of derived from that. And it led to some of the design, especially around landscape architecture, let's say as the placement of buildings, but landscape architecture materials. We kind of cataloged an idea of certain environmental qualities like wind, rain, moisture, heat, as well as things like sound and visibility through screening materials and metabolism on the bottom. And here, what you're starting to see is a kind of data visualization of the data we recorded, a moment in time, and the design that it kind of related to. So, for example, we were planting trees toward the noise. We were certain vegetation toward the noise. We were planting an orchard to the west to screen environmental conditions. We created certain colors of flowering, and change of leaves at the end of the year at certain times of year around programming events. And the data allowed us not only to understand it ourselves, but to communicate it to the client to make it kind of meaningful. And these are some of the interior spaces for that project. The last projects here, I'm categorizing under data-driven design. And so this is, you're going to see some buildings, some projects. And for me, it's kind of, these qualities of a place are there. As architects, landscape architects, planners, we don't make the qualities of places. We try to understand the place, and then we try to create architecture that, or landscape architecture, or urban design, or planning space at the urban scale, city scale. We try to create space that brings people in, let's say, consciousness of that condition. So a bit of like a personal story. I grew up not in New York City. My parents kind of escaped New York City, but I grew up in the Hudson River Valley. These are some like paintings of the Hudson River Valley. And then after undergraduate school, I went and lived in the city. Like my parents escaped the city, and I went back in the city. So I actually was living just below Central Park back when that was a possibility. We were in like office space. And so you can see this kind of bucolic space on the left. And then you can see, obviously, the lungs of New York City, which we were near. And then the image on the right is intentionally, I love the city of Barcelona, but I'm intentionally choosing a photo which, let's say, engages an idea of air quality, air pollution, which the city ranks quite highly in within Europe. And this is where I live now. It's kind of funny just to see this perceptual sense of place of where we are. I'm actually, that's my last house, but believe it or not, that's within walking distance of the school. My European friends are like, that's not a city. I'm like, yeah, it's a city. You're up on a hill. So it's interesting to see places. And so one of my first jobs out of undergraduate was working on this project, a high-speed train station designed by Carlos Ferreter at his office. And so this was right when Spain was joining the EU in 2000, and there was the high-speed train network. And I like showing this image because for me, you can obviously see this, like this is an urban design problem or project, but we were also from a computational point of view managing massive sets of data, back then in AutoCAD as X references, like massive data sets of X references. So for me, computing started almost as either form and management, but then I was able to help shape it through, like, I was the one who did the 3D modeling in the year 2000, like in the office, the only one. It was kind of funny. And this is the space, right? And so we're designing that kind of vessel you see from the outside is now this vessel here. And after graduate school, I had this great opportunity, just by going to the job book, by creating this great relationship with artist Janet Eckelman. So we worked together on some large-scale public art pieces. And I'm showing these because, again, it's about place and seeing the environment and, in a way, measuring the environment in a very qualitative way, which kind of I'm always thinking about with the sensor work. So this is in Porto, Portugal. It's actually in Richmond, not Vancouver, but the piece before the piece on the top, much of this image is actually a net sculpture, which you may have seen at the Vancouver, actually in Richmond, but for the Richmond Oval for the Vancouver Olympics, Winter Olympics. And then the piece on the top, this is some of the earlier renderings. But I got to work also with some engineers at Bureau Happel in New York, one of which Ian Coe, who developed some of and together with me, some of the drawings on the right. He's the one, if you've heard of Dynamo, you ever heard of Dynamo, the plugin for Revit? That's Ian actually doing Rhino scripting before Grasshopper, and then Ian helped one of the lead developers of Dynamo for Autodesk. So anyway, those images led to, like, this is the Phoenix piece, so it's kind of a series of pieces. And I think what Janet always thought of very well was how to capture a place in terms of its quality, but this is highly computationally driven. This is about 2 million diamonds in this net, and each one has a unique shape, let's say. And there's a kind of form-finding computation between the height and the width, which allows you to create these three-dimensional forms. So again, for me, it was just a bit of this history of, okay, I'm going from computing and form making, and I see a lot of great pieces around form making and making. And yet, I think maybe Janet helped me see also how this could be applied to a kind of qualitative approach to architecture. So I have a few houses. Houses allow me to kind of test ideas pretty quickly. This is a house for caretakers. It's actually a Section 8 housing, low-income housing project. It's a caretaker's house in Veneta, Oregon. The next project is in New York. And this was designed around 4 squares, and each of the squares has a relationship. It's called a push-pull house. There's corner windows, so this idea of being pulled out to nature or nature being pulled into you. But really what we were trying to create is a passively cooled house. So I also worked for Stephen Hull, and so with Stephen, obviously there's ideas of phenomena. So each of the squares has a monitor, which not only lets in a different orientation of light, but provides passive cooling. There's no active cooling in this house in terms of trying to maintain sustainability, energy sustainability. And that was driven by, this is Ladybug, like trying to understand solar analysis, radiance analysis, to then understand which angles, which orientations, and again, resulting in a kind of qualitative space. This is the top space where the grandchildren come and stay a couple of times a year in a kind of loft space, thinking of the orientation and the slot between some of those. The second house here I was able to go even further, I think, with the passive house. All 3 projects I'm going to show you have solar chimneys. So this is in Hyde Park, New York, about 2 hours north of New York City. Again, it's a house that relies on, you could just see it popping up, this solar chimney. And so the solar chimney, as we'll see, provides a really important sustainability component to this, but it's overlooking the Hudson River on the left. What's funny is, again, the client hired me and said, hey, I've got this great property. It was a friend of a friend, and it's on the Hudson River. So the Hudson River has to be an important part of the project. And yet, there's this beautiful waterfall in the winter, and it's only there in part of the year in the winter. And so we came up with this design that would orient in 3 different ways across 3 seasons. So it's almost like the house has different orientation across the year. And this kind of also emerged in combination with the passive cooling with ladybug analysis. So have any of you used Ladybug, which is a Grasshopper plugin for energy analysis or solar orientation? And so that allowed us to look at sectionally. She wanted a house to age in place. So even though we're on a slope to get the best view, we are primarily 1 story, with the exception of the solar chimney and kind of moon room and her ceramic studio below. So we're able to analyze 3 different floors at 3 different seasons, fall and spring being kind of similar solar orientation, and able to look for where, like in the summer here when they go red, we're looking for where is the blue in order to pull in cool air into that solar chimney to get it to be effective. We did some other studies here where it was the simulation on the left and then sensors on the right. So keep in mind when we do like ladybug analysis and we're pulling in EPW, energy plus weather data, you're usually getting it from like a local airport. Well, the local airport is 18 miles away. So that's great for solar analysis, but wind and other things, maybe it's not exactly as site located. So this was an interesting investigation of the difference between simulation and sensing, right? We designed areas like the overhang of the deck because not only does the overhang of the wraparound deck provide cooling or passive cooling strategies, but in upstate New York, we have a problem with ticks and Lyme disease. Is Lyme disease out here yet? Or it's too cold? It is. So it's a real problem. It's an immunodeficiency disease, and it was important to design around that. So this kind of collage on the left, very much kind of attributing to James Corner and field operations, but it allows us to understand seasons and climate conditions, creatures, vegetation, and it's not always benign. We're actually using it to try to understand when the tick is present in the site and then design strategy around it. And this is the final house. This slot is the solar chimney that provides the the cooling, the passive cooling in the summer months, small niches for during the winter months, seeing some kind of renderings of that, and then her ceramic studio down below. Last house, then we kind of get bigger in scale again. This is my house. It's a design build middle housing project. So it actually represents 3 units. There's a new planning law in the state of Oregon, House Bill 2001, such that more or less in cities over 50,000 inhabitants, all single-family housing has to accommodate up to 4 units of housing, given it follows guidelines. So this is very much about density and housing access. So what you can barely see the lowest level on a slope here. The middle of 2 floors is 1 house. The bottom is another unit, and the top is my office. And so this was about site, again, the qualitative understanding of site, but also, again, ladybug analysis to try to understand the solar orientation, trying to get the view, but as much south-facing light during the year. And we're looking at that for 3 different seasons again, trying to create this cut to create a space, a very narrow property, 47 feet, and yet trying to optimize that through this cut, which not only created space, but provided that view that you saw earlier to the Cascades. There's the solar chimney again, as a qualitative space, but an important component of passive cooling. We created our own topography maps in Grasshopper in order to efficiently make this project. It almost comes down to affordability, a very inexpensive site, because we were able to understand where the basalt was through the geotech report. This is the flooring, actually. Actually, that's an oak log. The fir is the flooring. This is, I think, going to be the stairs. Looking at phenomena in the site. And really that project is about, again, affording, using Grasshopper for both the site efficiency of setting the site in the hillside, the passive cooling approach, being able to build, almost like BIM would do, being able to build efficiently the geometry and just do a floor at a time, all to afford this view and connection to place. So this kind of just helped us gain a Forbes Top 200 Residential Architects Award And their criteria was connection to place. So what I'm trying to say is it's through the kind of analysis, the data analysis, that allowed us to do that in an affordable way. I never would have been able to do it. I would not have been able to afford a normal lot in town. It cost about a fifth of the cost of a normal lot. So going back up to the scale of kind of more of an urban scale project, this is a mixed use, adaptive reuse. It was actually an existing, the shell on the bottom was an existing potato chip factory from the 1950s, board formed concrete. And this is for a beer hall, office space, and then above it, residences. And so in this case, again, there's this, we could begin with kind of qualitative analysis of how to create a space between, this is part of the food hall. So we're trying to create an idea of warmth and light, and again, passive cooling through the courtyard in the back, but at the same time, a space between the 1950s building and the new building, if you will, on the right. This is an existing timber building. The social interaction tool, I use it on all my projects. We're using it to identify the deficiencies or strengths in a neighborhood, in this case around the project, and we're able to identify the need for kind of more seating, a more diversity of housing type, some basic needs in infrastructure to kind of convince the client why it might be useful even to have more access to bathrooms, things like that. So we're using these diagrams for even commercial building projects. And then again, some of the ladybug analysis work here. This is almost, the project that we did for this is on the lower right, but on the upper left is their previous project. I think that's what Billy Faircloth did with that green roof. I think in speaking to her, it was almost like she took money from one client and said, hey, we're going to take your schematic design money, and we think it makes sense to do a post-occupancy study of a previous rooftop, and that's going to lead to you having a better project. So we actually did the ladybug analysis to their previous project and led it to inform the south-facing. They really wanted a vernacular project, and I used the data analysis to convince them that their vernacular strategies were not working. Basically, in the summer, none of the kind of south-facing gable roofs were overhanging enough. They could have, but they were really not overhanging enough to be effective. And that was their experience, and I lived there too in that space. So again, using data like in order to understand yourself and then to communicate and convince your ideas, I think is very powerful and compelling. And I really think the generation I see of designers out there are going to be in a great position to do that in ways that in previous years it was like renderings or certain kinds of sexy drawings. I mean, you're actually showing information, right? And it's a very powerful position to be in because you definitely can skew how you explain information as well. We see that all around us in society. So again, kind of looking at the solar chimney in this project to bring air through this commercial project. And this is a CLT project, south-facing in Eugene, all of those spaces south-facing for passive heating and passive cooling. So last two projects here are teaching projects. I really take great joy and it's been incredibly informative to test a lot of these methods and in classes. So the first of these was our Barcelona urban design project from 2022. And this is a slide that my students here have seen probably too many times. But it starts to talk about how you understand a place. So these students started with an idea of caretaking in Barcelona. What's the problem? Who does it affect? What are some quantitative ways of contextualizing the problem and sometimes comparing it to a local city? Looking at some local problems. We typically look at newspaper articles to understand local opinion. And then we create this really important in the middle. I see some of my students really important in the middle. Theoretical framework. How do you go from the big idea of caretaking to a kind of subtopic idea of self-care, public care, and community care? How do you get to qualities or characteristics in an urban space? And then lastly, how do you measure them? What are indicators? So actually, I think I didn't mention it earlier, but any of you familiar with WalkScore? There's like a website called WalkScore. You put in your address, it gives you a score, 86. I think you got a 97 for the new campus. You're gonna love the new campus. So 97 for the new campus. So where does WalkScore come up with 97? It comes up with it from an algorithm, but there's about 10 different things. Proximity to a coffee shop, schools, proximity to a park, proximity to conveniences, proximity to transit, right? And it gives you a 97. But you could have a 97 and be really close to everything, and especially close to transit, and you could have a 97 and be really close to parks. So unfortunately, what's happening there is dissimilar data is just being collapsed into one number. Fine, for like just people want to know a number, but we would love to know the breakdown of those 10 criteria. So that's where, again, these circle diagrams, even this, we can facilitate the students doing these diagrams. They're a little simpler because they're not doing 60 indicators, but even if they break down 10 or 12, they're able to pull out what are the deficiencies or what's working really well. So again, this is what this theoretical framework is. I find this very important, and I very much lean on my own learning from Karen Frank and others in kind of the social science area to do this in terms of how to measure, ways to measure along that kind of aim. And then this is one of our students working with Ignacio Lopez, was the landscape architect instructor working with me. And this is one of the projects. You're seeing a kind of situated technology. So on the right is the design of the space, in this case around ecology and sound, and how people inhabit spaces around sound in these super plazas or intersections. And the image on the left is actually an exploration of situated technology. We have this information, we've collected this data, in this case with sensors as well. How would the public get that information? So obviously we can all get the information here, but more and more cities are exploring ideas of situated technology where that information is communicated either in direct form of numbers or text, or as color and light or sound, that we can, let's say, move this information to the public for behavioral change. This is Nicole. She got a SELA award for this in 23. The team did, actually. I think she was the one there to collect it with Sophia and Zhong Eng. And then you're actually seeing some of the work taught by, also at the GIS scale or QGIS scale, by Ignacio, this incredible partner and friend of mine in that project, for that program. So then I have a last set of slides here for the 24 program in Barcelona, which was awesome. So it was the first time we were able to do it in the spring and not summer. Summer is great. Not only is the summer hot, the problem is the city, the municipal agency of Urbanism, they're done like in August, which also means they're done like mid-July. So for 12 years, I never had an opportunity to have a collaboration with the Municipal Institute of, not the way I wanted to in the summer, and the opportunity to have great collaborating instructors. So this is a full program, 4 classes. And so by moving the program to the spring, it was such an incredible experience. I would say the students said so, not because of me, but because of the local partner with the local partnering government and the local instructors. What you're going to see here is a lot of the same techniques and methods that I've been talking about. So this is the area that we're studying, Marina del Prat Vermell, that the students here from Calgary are also studying. And again, this is this neighborhood with 28,000 new residents, 52% protected housing. There's the qualitative part, so there's this kind of measuring this location. We're also going to the Alhambra and the Great Mosque of Cordoba, and then we followed that up with a 1-week visit with people I know, so RCR architects who I think got the Pritzker about 4 or 5 years ago. Carme Pijem is able to work with them. She asked this question of where and then what. I think as architects normally, it's the question of what? What's the program? And I'm in this place. And I thought, which was very compelling from a qualitative understanding of place, is like, where are we? And they would just send the students out to the villa grounds to find a place. Don't ask what you're doing there. Find a place. Understand the place. Experience the place. And then ask what you do there. Obviously, as professionals, we need to follow a program, but I think we always do ask what's unique about a place. This was their catalog. This was Maria, the local tutor who was part of RCR, some of that program. We had visits to some of their projects in their office. And so this starts some of some great opportunities there. This is the CLT factory, so from Oregon, we're wood people, probably like you. And so this is one of 3 CLT factories in Spain, which is also co-generating the hot water for the whole town, which is quite amazing, right, from a sustainability point of view. And so I wanted to point out, now this is where it kind of comes back to the point of the lecture here. This is Cynthia Achave, this amazing opportunity. She was like the subdirector for the Superias. And I didn't mention it earlier, the idea of indicators, having qualities and then indicators thereof, just like in walk score, we don't measure people walking. We're measuring indicators, right? Walk score is not in any way mapping people walking. it's mapping proximities. So I really learned also about indicators from Cynthia and their work in the Superias. And so she teaches our theory class on these 5 topics. Jesus Arcos of Aldea Jover co-teaches the studio with me around ideas of anything from public housing. We're doing public housing, obviously, in that neighborhood, to larger territorial ideas around water. If you've been following the news in Spain, it's been pretty horrific in Valencia and Barcelona. But they're designing with Aldea Jover the largest park in Madrid, and many of their projects are around water and understanding the edges of water. Gonzalo Alonso of Gonzalo Architects in Galicia, some amazing, beautiful spaces. You can see the kind of qualitative. I'm intentionally kind of explaining data collection and then qualities of space. And so Gonzalo is just incredible. So he comes twice. It's almost a little bit like this. He came in the beginning and the end, but in the middle was remote. And it was a really great experience then designed toward projects like this. And there's 3 kind of project images, and then there's a movie I want to play. It's just 60 seconds, but it will, I think, to explain why are we watching this is because it connects the students' engagement of understanding fine-grained urbanism and the architecture and urban design they create.
A meeting place for the masses across centuries of population growth and cultural collision. To accommodate city life on such a scale, alcoves were carved from the urban fabric to create space for community. To understand conditions of the site and across Barcelona, we conducted street-level observations of urban qualities related to social cohesion and the heat island effect.
We also considered connections to the existing outdoor spaces and how safe, pedestrianized streets could help create one open space uninterrupted by automobile traffic.
The housing floats above the market, maintaining a visual connection between public spaces.
The proposed structural plan for the market includes preserving and highlighting the historic walls and steel trusses, employing cross-laminated timber to reinforce existing structure.
The housing units use a combination of cemented paneled decking with glulam beams and columns.
The housing program creates 43 total units, of which the majority are 3 bedrooms. By carving out alcoves for social interaction across scales, the project creates opportunities for vitality and cohesion to take root in this growing neighborhood.
It's a term project in 60 seconds. That's talking pretty quickly. And then this is what we're doing this week, the same area. So it's we have a week here to drop in some of this methods. So we're using, if you want to know on the technical side of this, we're using Rhino-based Grasshopper. There's a bit of a script overall I call Elephant, but I'm actually using within it Timothy Logan's Elk plugin. There's others now, like Bison and others using OSM data. And so what you're seeing on the left is actually that's all the OSM background data. And then the second thing was to generate a series of points using their own data collection gathered remotely by Google Street View, and then visualized through, in this case, circles, but could be other shapes. So this is being fed by, the values of the circles is being fed by a spreadsheet that the students are creating themselves. And then we can visualize from 2D to 3D. We can combine these, but basically deploying a stepped way of creating data visualization, which can operate at different scales, in fact. And then these are the spaces that they are looking at. This is the Marina del Prat Vermell. This is a great co-op building. And at first you say this is a nice space, but really the city is having a significant problem with the ground floor space for a place in Barcelona. Look at the extent of the blank wall here. And then even though this is glazed, there aren't really doors. There's only a couple of doors. And then you can see on the right, there's very little permeability. So the city made a significant investment in the urban infrastructure, such as the rain garden on the right, but they're struggling to find out what's the right set of resources and way to deploy, let's say, very, very targeted urban design features or strategies to help bring to life the street life of this neighborhood. So we're comparing that with Barcelona's superejes, superia. So they changed the superia idea and kind of just scaled it to be super axes. The idea of the 3x3 would cut off too much traffic, but the city has, in fact, been implementing the superias as super axes. They're just bigger and longer, and there's some very incredible spaces. So our students are also measuring these spaces through Google Street View. And so as well as Google Maps. And this is the new campus area. A few of us are going to go out tomorrow and measure the same indicators around this fantastic neighborhood in Calgary that you're going to love. So again, those are like applications. And so I'm still doing this research. It's kind of ongoing. It kind of leads me to questions of what does granularity mean at the scale of data acquisition in terms of scales of time, space, and quality? What does granularity of data visualization, like the visualization as analysis, mean in terms of theoretical ideas on the urbanism? And then lastly, the data-driven design, as you saw, how can it affect the design process and how can it affect people's everyday use of urban space? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
So,
Question?
yeah, absolutely. So just on behalf of the school, I just want to thank you for the lecture. I am stunned by the breadth of the work that you do. And not only does it touch all of the disciplines, it goes from some exquisite houses and spaces and architecture to the technical computational side. So thank you very much for that. Questions? Ready? Oh, yes, right there.
You highlighted how important it is to collect that data in order to create a structure. But so on average, how long does it take to collect those data? On average, throughout your most projects.
You can see my reaction. So the social interaction tool for the city of Barcelona, when we were doing those big, well, the 3x3 block area, so that was, you're walking around 200 point locations, recording 60 indicators of data. Now, about half of those I do on site. Some of the other ones, like if I want to do the housing, to understand housing, let's say characteristics, we will measure on their Zillow, we'll use online data for number of bedrooms, number of baths, cost per square foot. If we can find menus, we do for cost accessibility, we do most expensive meal, least expensive meal. So if we can find the menu online, we'll do that. It's easier than being in place. So whenever we can find things online, we'll do that. But to answer your question, I think when we originally did it years ago, it was me and some data collectors for about a week. When I've done it for the projects in downtown Eugene, when we've done them, I've taken maybe 3 people working for me. We'll go for 2 days. It's not horrible. It is. It's not. It's a good. You bring up a good point. These kinds of studies, I am definitely talking with people on projects I have in the last 2 or 3 years of how would you scale it up, right? I think observation studies we do them all the time. We need to do site visits and observation, and I don't think that much time is that onerous. But the question of how would it scale, you're going to have to then find proxies, like placeholders for the data and things that are kind of similar. And obviously, I think that's an amazing project to do. It will need collaboration with a larger team in terms of computer science work and whatnot. But I think even in that case, it's different than observation. Social scientists and urban psychologists do observation studies like this, I'd say, all the time, even month-long studies.
Other questions? Yes, a couple over here.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you've ever been approached to do or have ever done any dashboards that are sort of taking live feeds of data in, because especially for something like air pollution, that would be so interesting if you could go online and get a real time kind of readout that's at that granular scale.
Yeah. So Purple Air kind of does that. So if you're not familiar with Purple Air, you can buy a sensor kit for about $300. It's using the same sensor we use inside of it. By default, when you log in, plug into your network, it goes to a map. You can elect not to do that. And a city like Eugene, Oregon, has about 300 citizen sensors right now. I have one right now operating in Barcelona. There's, I think, 5 in all of Barcelona. I think what you're getting at, which I'm super interested in, is this idea of situated technology, where the information is offered to the public. So the same way, I'd say historically, you see in some towns, I know when we go to Granada, I'll never forget seeing the kiosk thing that said 44 degrees Celsius, right? 44, it's pretty hot. Yeah. So it seems dumb. It seems really dumb as a society. And we actually had photoshopped versions of this for that school. So when you approach a school, it says your speed is, your speed is X. It would say your PM is, right? Honestly, I honestly think we're at a weird point, and this is from my interaction with cities, we're at a strange point where the technology is becoming available and low-cost sense. Some of these things are becoming accurate enough to do. I'm not sure we have the political experience of how to always share the data without scaring people or contextualizing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like in the case of a bubble event, it would be really interesting if people had access to data, like especially for out-of-house people, if there was some way for them to access data about like
yeah.
where there was like localized areas that were less hot.
Yes.
Just kind of from like a public safety perspective.
Yes. Yeah. There's a company called Frog in I forget where, I mean, they're in the States. I know they have an office in New York, but elsewhere. You might want to check them out. Frog, like industrial design. And they do these kind of resilient totems that you've seen in New York around emergency information. And I think that's probably a adjacent application of what you're talking about, where there's either information, power, Wi-Fi coming from these points in space. Yeah.
That was kind of my question about like security, about like kind of more access towards these data informations, especially with like air pollution in certain areas, like sensor data, how like the public would perceive that.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I think it's not a problem. I think it's something we don't have enough experience at yet. Let's put it that way. And it probably requires, as designers, working with other disciplines.
Maybe time for one last question?
Or you can find me around in the next couple of
You're not
days.
gonna jump off.
Thank you so much. It's been a real privilege, and I'm learning so much from the students here. I don't normally get to have so much time with planning students and also just experience here in the city. It's been fantastic. I'm really grateful for the opportunity.